Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Am I holding this close enough? I'm told I have to hold this very close to my mouth. No? You're not hearing me very well? Use the top. Oh, thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to have you all here today, and those of you who are joining us online, welcome. My name is Theo Spanos-Dunphy, and I'm the Executive Director of Global Citizen Circle, and I'm so pleased to be here. I would like to thank our co-hosts this morning, the Shapiro Library, the Office of International Student Services, and the Deborah L. Coffin Women's Center. Thank you very much for their support of this program. I'll tell you a few things about Global Citizen Circle. I'm going to keep it really brief because I know many of you probably have to run off to classes come 12:15-ish. What I want to say about Global Citizen Circle is that we are about civil discourse. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying we're about respectful conversations. And we really welcome participation from all of you in the audience. We keep our format relatively simple. It may be a little bit different than what you are accustomed to. We've asked our discussion leader to make some opening remarks, relatively brief, and then a question from our moderator, and then we will open it up to all of you for your questions and comments, because it's our firm belief that it is only through these kinds of conversations with people who you may or may not agree with, but to discuss the issues that are of importance. And this is how we get to making constructive change in our world. I'm sorry to tell you that this morning I got word from the moderator who was that we were planning to have here this morning, Professor Tadros from the Department of Communications and Media Arts. She was ill, and she sent her regrets. But we're really very fortunate to have with us today Janet Breslin-Smith, who is an educator. She was the chairwoman of the Department of National Security Strategy at the National War College. She worked on Capitol Hill in the office of Senator Patrick Leahy. She spent a number of years in Saudi Arabia when her husband, Jim Smith, was the U.S. ambassador to the country. And it's there that she met many wonderful Saudi women. She's also very active in her local community of Salem, New Hampshire. So Janet is and skilled, so I know she's will be wonderful as the moderator, and I just want to say thank you to her, and also that Janet really embodies what we think of as a global citizen. She is engaged and active locally and nationally and internationally, and this is what we can all aspire to. And so we're very fortunate indeed to have her here today. Also, she is the reason that we have Hala Al-Dosari here with us as a discussion leader. And so we thank her for that as well. We owe you. We owe you. So I'm going to turn this over now to Janet to introduce Hala Al-Dosari, and we'll get the program started. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, as you're working in, yes, hello in blue sweatshirt. Blue sweatshirt. Come sit in front. Anybody, well, first off, can you hear me? Can you hear me? I also had surgery a few days ago, so if you cannot hear me, or my tongue is too big because I had oral surgery, raise your hand. And you can hear me. And for students that come in, Eleanor, if you can push them in front, because I want this to be a discussion. Welcome to you all. Happy spring. Pretty soon there'll be flowers. Where Hala and I first met each other in Washington, and I was in Washington last week, and the cherry blossoms were blooming and the daffodils. So I can tell you, spring will come here too. It just takes a little longer. I want to again welcome you to this engagement. As Theo mentioned, And for those of you who are in school, it will be possible in your lives to have many careers. So I spent the first 17 years of my life working on Capitol Hill for Senator Patrick Leahy. Did a number of different topics working on the Hill. I loved it. And if you want help in figuring out if you want to be an intern in Congress, talk to me after this. I believe in internships. Can you hear me? I believe in How's that? Well, how's that? Oh. I believe in internships, and I'm happy to help you get one, either for our congressional delegation, the Senate delegation in Washington, or even working here in New Hampshire. For the second part of my career, I taught at the National War College. Wonderful experience. It's for colonels and foreign service officers before they become a general or before they become an ambassador. Again, a remarkable place. I hope I didn't kill anybody. A remarkable place, and I enjoyed that experience. It's a graduate school. And then I had the opportunity to go to Riyadh and to go to Saudi Arabia when my husband became ambassador. And when I was there, I realized that I had the opportunity, the privilege to be in a place that was just beginning profound change. I think you would agree. Education, social media, all these things were happening. One of the strongest impressions and memories I had was how many young women I met in Riyadh, in Jeddah, in the Eastern Province, who were totally embracing the educational opportunities they were getting and moving ahead with ambition, confidence, and optimism. And when I got back to Washington, I realized that because of the scholarship program, there are a lot of Saudi students here at Snhu, down in Boston area, certainly down in DC. There are over 2,000 Saudi women students in the DC area alone. So with that, one of the women I met when I got back to DC was Hala Dosari, who has a remarkable background herself, both in public health and women's health issues in the kingdom and throughout the region, really looking at the impact of gender issues on the provision of health. And then growing from that, she enhanced her own support and advocacy for both women's rights and human rights. So I'm going to tell you one story because she's going to talk about social media, but I want to let you know, as an older person, as the tech challenge generation, who needs their grandchildren to help them figure out social media. The very first time I found out what Twitter was in Riyadh. And it was 2011, and it's right when the Arab Spring started, when Tahrir Square in Egypt, the revolutions were starting. And I wanted to understand what was happening. And my husband, who was seeing this from an official point of view, is very careful about what's secret, what should be classified, what he shouldn't talk about. So he gets very quiet in situations of high crisis. That drives me crazy. I want to know what's going on. So one night after a reception, one of our wonderful, actually he's Egyptian American, one of our young foreign service officers told me, you should get on Twitter and follow what's going on in Egypt. So that night, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, I got my laptop, reception was over, he was there cleaning up with us. He said, okay, get your laptop out, I'm going to show you Twitter. So he signed me up, gave me a name, did all this stuff. And he said, now, I'm going to show you who to follow in Egypt so you can understand what's going on. And let's just do an experiment. Let's look at all the tweets right now in English within 25 kilometers of our residence. And you hit a button, and the screen lit up with conversation. And my first reaction as an old person was, I shouldn't read this. These are private communications between people. You see how old I am. These are private communications between people, and they're talking about personal things on Twitter, and I shouldn't look at this. And then I thought, this is public information. They're putting it out there, and I realized, especially if you think about in Riyadh, women can, until now this summer, women couldn't drive. Women generally stayed at home. I realized that social media was opening up a level of conversation and connection that I hadn't appreciated. I think Twitter use in Saudi Arabia is one of the highest in the world. So with that, I want to introduce Hala because she is a courageous woman. Harvard Law School just named her one of their global women of inspiration. And I want her to share her stories with you. So Hala, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Very much happy to be here. Please tell me if my voice is not as loud. So, yeah, so picking up on Twitter, social media has been one of the major tools in the Arab world because it's very much a politically constrained places or closed spaces where you don't have that many of open venues for people to mobilize or to influence each other's or to exchange opinions. But that doesn't mean that people were not, can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right. Oh, that's going to be a challenge. I'm going to have to speak directly into it. All right. Spin. All right. I'm good. So one of the main issues I want to highlight is that social media is merely a tool, but it doesn't bring the capacity of people, doesn't bring the voices and aspirations of people if they're not there. So what I want to stress is that there is a pool of people everywhere, including in my country, in Saudi Arabia and other places in Egypt, that really motivates others and try to find tools. One of them is the social media to bring people together around common causes or advocacy. For us in Saudi Arabia, women are we're very much gender segregated. We are, very much not only in Saudi Arabia, but in different countries in the Arab world, women have higher educational attainments than men. But again, because of the traditional norms surrounding the roles of women and men, women were most often have prioritized roles in the care economy, health, education, or in her own home, basically, and taking care of the family. So you wouldn't get that much of women coming together or finding spaces to mobilize each other's or to push for change. And it's not surprising that the majority of activists in Saudi Arabia came from places where women work, actually, academics, health professionals, women who have been at the workforce. So that is not a surprise because these women have the first-hand experience of what's missing. Again, the global culture. I'm really happy to be in a global citizen circle because that really embodies the idea of activism. The spirit of activism is to be a global citizen, is to have more aspirations of how to bring people together and how to voice concern and mobilize issues. So I'm happy to be here, first of all. About the movements, I think I would speak about my own basically initiatives in Saudi Arabia and how I came about to be engaged in those kinds of social movements. But I will open the floor for questions because I think that is more interesting than just narrating what I want to say. I am a medical scientist by profession. I come from a family of mixed origin. My mother is Egyptian and my father is Saudi, is a tribal. I lived in a cosmopolitan place in Jeddah. Most of my friends and family members were coming from different places as well. So I grew up among Palestinians, Egyptians, not necessarily purely Saudi people. So this kind of cosmopolitan culture somehow buffered the impact of expected roles and norms, allowed women like myself and others in the city of Jeddah, and I think you've noticed that Jeddah is more of socially open places for women where they can pursue different roles easily than in places which is most conservative, as in Riyadh or in different other places. And that house somehow encourages women and young people to pursue things which might be frowned upon if you are in a different place. So I'm a medical scientist by training. I worked in pathology departments, and I got my master's from the University of Surrey in the UK. Before the scholarship programs started, so I should have waited. But then I got my PhD. I worked for 2 years in Riyadh. I ran a pathology department. I headed actually the department. I enjoyed this is another thing I always wanted to stress, that people are not misogynist. They're not really against women per se, but there are things that they hold dear, and they feel that because of the lack of the public discussion around these issues, the safe places for people to engage in discussion, they feel a threat whenever these issues are brought to the attention. So I was very happy working in Riyadh. I headed a department. I enjoyed, participation in different high-level committees. And I got accepted into a PhD program when I enrolled in the scholarship programs, which started in 2005. And I think at that time I was contributing to a national newspaper in Saudi Arabia, and that kind of connection to the public affairs was unprecedented for women. There were a minority of women writers in the media. Media is very much censored. You have taboos not to speak about religion, not to speak about the ruling family, not to speak about certain issues which might be considered unallowed or unpermitted in the normal or traditional media. But again, we pushed the envelope. I find myself added to one of the other activists, Hatun El-Fassi. She had her writer group. She reached out to any women that she writes, and she feels like this woman is tapping into the most significant issues. And of course, I find myself writing more about women as a woman who was working in the public place and who's running department and who's doing things which is contradictory to the expected roles and norms from other women. So she added me to that group of women, and then you get this flood of emails from people who are recognizing your writings and they want you to voice their concerns. So I get more engaged into the movement of human rights. I got invited to informal networks of other activists who wanted to push the boundary to basically bring their governments, not only in Saudi Arabia, but the Arab Gulf states, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in the UAE, in Oman. There are men and women who were trying to, and that is before even the advent of the social media, in 2000, I would say 9 or maybe before that. When I came to do my PhD, so this is where the sense of public engagement came from writing, from engagement with people who are commenting on my writings, who want me to write about their own issues, and trying to find your voice, basically, and where you can be more effective and where you can relate more to the issues that you're discussing. Of course, it's women's rights and human rights. And then I got into blogging when I came here to do my PhD, because I felt like somehow when you're away from your own culture and you're experiencing life from a different perspective, it forces you to look into your own context from a different angle. It's somehow you're re-examining life from a different perspective altogether. Even things which, I remember one time I was, of course, the first time I've driven in the US, I got my first driving license. So I was standing at a traffic light in my car, and there's these two women who met each other at the traffic light, and they were so happy to meet each other, obviously, because they laughed out loud. And for me, that felt like everybody in the street was hearing their conversation and they're laughing, basically, their laughters. And I felt like this is very unusual. All those little cues to cultural things that you feel that this is not something that you would experience in your culture, and why your presence has to be so much censored in public places. So you get to have this kind of sense of who you are and what's allowed and what's not allowed by just immersing yourself in the difference, right? And then I started blogging, and there was a network of bloggers. Iman Nafjan is one of them, one of the leaders of the October 26th driving campaign. And we kept on having, each one of us bring the others into their own networks. We grow somehow. We have discussed the same issues. There is this sense of keen interest in exploring our own identity. What does it mean to be a woman in that place? Do we have certain obligations? What can we say about our own culture? How can we push the boundaries more? And I think that was one thing that is shared among the group of bloggers. If you go to Saudi Women Blog, which is one of the oldest blogs in Saudi Arabia, that was started in 2008 by Iman Nafjan, and it's just more like a chronicle of daily life and contemporary daily life of Saudi Arabia, and it's amazing. She gets a lot of interest from people because she blogged in English. And again, Ahmed Al-Imran, a Shiite young man whom have pushed to be a journalist because of the quality of his writing. He is a pharmacist by training. And he ended up, a journalist at the Wall Street Journals now. But again, this small group of people who are trying to reflect on what does it mean to be this person with an access to influence and power that is not the traditional influence, basically, because that power came from recognition and from reaching out and from trying to impact a change rather than by a position or tribal lineage, which is the traditional line of power. So somehow we came together because we felt like we're well connected to submit petitions to the state. And then Arab Revolution 2011 happened, and with every political opening or opportunities, you will find that the government usually makes concessions. So we're at the forefront trying to write petitions for constitutional monarchy. We don't have a constitution in Saudi Arabia. We were at the forefront trying to release people who were imprisoned because of their ideas, and many of them were friends of mine as a writer. Trying to petition the government to do more, but then the advent of creating a social movement came when, after submitting so many petitions to the government to lift the driving ban, I felt like this is not going to work because this is very much of a, the traditional thing that we're doing. Why can't we just do something more? And then in 2013, at the time I was back to Saudi Arabia, finished my PhD, a group of women came together and said, well, we're creating this kind of social media online where we are trying to ask people to submit their support by driving on the street, women to drive on the street. Since the government has said so much it's a societal issue, why can't we just show that the society is ready? So we started, allocating tasks. Many of us have driven in each other's cars. I don't have a car. My father said, well, I don't want to go after my car in the, when the police tow it. And I'm a very old man. You're welcome to do whatever you're doing, but not with my car. So I had to go with another friend, Tamabar Al-Yami, who lives in the same city, and she owns a car actually. So we went there and we took pictures. We took turns basically driving, and we recorded our driving and we posted to the hashtag of the movement. We asked influential key figures to submit messages of support. We had videos for many of them. Dr. Mustafa Al-Hassan, who's a professor, an Islamic thought leader, gave us a video, and he was imprisoned recently in the roundup of September 2017. So we had so many people actually. Some of them are figures, women figures, but as well men, because we needed to show that this is a support from both men and women. One of the men who supported us, so the first person who bought us the SIM card that we can use to receive messages of support, was the first to get arrested. And we've enlisted the help of other men who were influential in the power circles to get him out after 10 days, which happened, thank God. But then you get to see with the growth of the movement, we had petitions put online, and the petition was blocked by the government 3 days afterwards. We got to be very creative in ways where we can really put life into this. We got to a stage where we were asking the government to arrest women. And we've written, of course, I've received so many, and this is where the time, 2011 is the time where I decided I'm not writing anymore for the Saudi media because it's very much censored, and I felt like whatever I want to say, I could say it on blogs. Why do I have to be censored on state media? And then I get requests from other places in the world who wanted to know more, and then you get the sense that people are recognizing what you're doing there, and they want to give voice, a different narrative than the state's narrative. So we get a lot of requests to write. I've written to The Guardian, to the Foreign Affairs, to the Foreign Policy since then, and to different places basically, because they wanted to understand the perspective of people, not only from the, from the state narratives or from the state point of view. And we've written during the October 26th, I've written to The Guardian, Iman written, and we've actually become more creative in finding ways until a point where some of the women in the movement said, well, we need someone to get arrested, because that's the only way we can revive and keep the movement going. So a movement is not only dedicated people or people who believes in something, but it's also an opportunity. So there is an opportunity and resources for them to do something. And as well, it's a sustainability. So you need to have means to sustain your movement online. Even if it's created a big buzz, the nature of online presence is that it will go away and it will fade with the next big thing. So how to give life to things that you hold dear, basically. So we needed someone to get arrested at the time. So courageous women went online, and we at the beginning we wanted to avoid arresting because we wanted to give this sense of you can do it and no one was gonna get you, basically. So we would go during the time where there is no one on the streets, or very briefly, driving very briefly, that we're not gonna, the chances of getting caught is very minimal. But then women went on, major streets, and at times when there is a lot of traffic. So of course they got arrested, and they've documented all the steps of the arrests and everything. So we felt like at that time we were creating this kind of sustainability, that the world is not only watching what the people are doing, but what the government is responding, how the government is responding. Of course, as you all know, it all ended when 2 women got arrested. One of them was trying to cross the borders between UAE and Saudi Arabia in her car, of course, documenting every step of the way, trying to see if the government is going to honor her driving license, which is from Dubai. to allow her to drive inside Saudi Arabia. Of course, just we know that it will not happen, but it was a way to keep the movement going. Then she got arrested, and then all the other women in the movement felt, okay, this is a time where there is a lot of risk involved in the woman who's joining the movement, and there is definitely no potential support from anyone to support this, this movement. So I felt like we need to move on something that is more relevant, that is meaningful to people. We've done enough on influencing a change and challenging the norms when it comes to, basically we've discussed all kinds aspects of this kind of restricted mobility on women, including bringing the religious edicts that supported that into the discussion. So I thought we should move on into the guardianship issue, which is a system, a set of practices or laws. Sometimes it's written in law, sometimes it's just the normal practices that is allowing men to have a veto basically on every choices of a woman's life. So basically men would have to give you a permission or to get a travel document or to travel outside of the state, to enroll in scholarship, to get your identification documents, to get a life-saving abortion, you know, a whole host of things that you need to have the guardian. And it's very dear to me because as a researcher, and sometimes I have to remind people that I'm a researcher, I have the research on that, because I work around violence against women, and in that type of research, the only way to change the prevalence of violence against women, which is very epidemic in most countries, including the Arab countries, is to change the position of women, to give her more autonomy and more power to affect her own choices in life. And that can never happen in patriarchal setup. So in order to allow women more autonomy, more support, and more respect, you need to change the norms. And the guardianship system embodies basically the patriarchal power or the control of men over women. So we started writing, you know, a petition to the king, and we started, you know, bringing the same support system that happened. But luckily, I was contacted by someone from the Human Rights Watch, a researcher that I worked with for years, and this is part as well of the activism, is to, if you don't have the resources, because we don't have civil society organizations inside Saudi Arabia, I've reached out to organizations outside. So to tap into resources, as I said, activism involves locating resources, whether inside or outside. So if you can talk about prisoners of conscience or what's happening inside Saudi Arabia, I've reached out to people who can do that through their own research and resources. I'm on board of Human Rights Watch for the Middle East region and on the Gulf Center for Human Rights, which is also based on the Middle East. We've launched, you know, with a group of women and with the researcher from Human Rights Watch, a report called Boxed In, which details in research all aspects of you know, choices that are controlled by men. So that report has we've created even videos for the promotional you know, content of the report. And when we get to sit with other activists to decide on, so it's an animation basically based on 3 scenarios. Women who's trying to leave prison, and women who are trying to leave abusive relationship, and women who's trying, a professional woman who's trying to travel to attend a conference and her son wouldn't give her the permission. So in those 3 short scenarios, her son wouldn't give her the permission because yes, your son could be the default guardian if it's the next of kin male relative. So what happened is that when we decided on the woman to appear, both of us are very much liberal women, progressive, we don't really conform to the dress codes. So I was worried that the women with me would not recognize that you know, we have to present the videos for the women who must suffer from those practices. But luckily, the women with me and myself, we picked the women with the veil, because that is the scenarios that must happen in conservative. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen for progressive women as well, but I mean, the most women impacted by these are the women who comes from conservative norms. And you get to see those videos with women covered, instead of women with you know, only a headscarf. So what happened is that those things created a buzz, basically. We created a hashtag, and it, you know, the women online, because they're very much, you know, we're one of the highest country in the penetration of the internet. You get highly educated women who are not working because of the lack of opportunities and because of the social norms. And you get all those women online, on Twitter. So they picked up on the hashtag, and it became more of a daily hashtag. They added a number from the beginning. Now we're going into 600 something, we're almost 660 something days since the startup of this, and they've actually created all kinds of other facets for the campaign through their work. We got an artist in Australia who's doing her PhD. She's a Saudi, who has done graffiti arts around the women involved and around the movement, the main voices and narratives. She would ask us to submit, our handwritten messages as activists. What do you want to say if you want it to be, posted on a wall for other people to see? And she would take picture of our handwriting and, post that as part of the graffiti. And you get to see all those kinds of manifestation of support and solidarity across different venues, not only in terms of activism or lobbying the government, but in art. We had videos, we had people who are singing, actually. We had No Woman, No Drive, an adaptation of Bob Marley's song, which was made by stand-up comedians in Saudi Arabia. We got a woman, Rutana, who submitted a video about, or a song actually, to women drivers. And you get to see that in the guardianship. There is all kinds of, traditional songs that were brought to life by actors inside Saudi Arabia. So I would say that social media has played a huge role in connecting us in the absence of the physical space, or the unions or parties or this type of developed political system or structure. But at the same time, it did not mean that you can't really work in different, you have to have the same ingredients as any other country. You have to have the will of the people. You have to have the dedication of people, exactly like any other country. But how those kinds of, I would say, initiatives and advocacy reach to people might be different. And in places like the Arab countries, it did make a difference for us. But again, you don't see the outcome as a change in basically the practices or the law. You see it as a change of norms, a realization of what the government would do, what an absolute monarchy would do in response to these things. Luckily, women will be able to drive now in June. But again, the first thing that happens with every social change from authoritarian governments is that those who are calling for those kinds of change, although the changes have, you get political concessions to these changes. But what happened is the cost of having those political concessions is to silence those people involved. So your royal court called up the main women activists in the driving license side Saudi Arabia. 2 of them were outside and warned them from engaging in the media in order to create a narrative that celebrates the modernization of efforts led by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, rather than by women as partners or by women as mobilizers. So that doesn't mean that you don't get to say something. I mean, people in diaspora, including myself, have been active as well in revealing those kinds of things and supporting those kinds of things. And I like the idea that until now, journalists are reaching out to me and trying to get a narrative that is different from that of to engage people in different rhetoric than that promoted by the state. And I think it's the real wealth of people. The more you have people who are building on capacity experience, the more you have power and I think profound impact of any social movement. So I will stop at here and then.
So that is a wonderful example of why I'm so. Whoops, can you hear me? It's why I'm so optimistic. I want to have questions, but I want to put this in context. 2 things. What Hala is talking about is how do you have influence in a government, in a culture, a country, which is an absolute monarchy. In other words, you petition, if you heard her mention this, you petition the king. But there is no avenue. No? Can't hear. There is no avenue. There is no avenue for a normal expression of concern. So for those of you who are taking any political science classes now at all, or you remember your government classes, 2 things I want you to think about. How much we take these qualities, these procedures for granted, right? We live in a country where you have lots and lots of alternatives for expression. But I also want you to think about how hard it would have been for the framers of the Constitution in Philadelphia that hot summer if they had social media. If people were commenting, oh my God, did you hear what Benjamin Franklin did today? Oh my God. Or Thomas Jefferson, he's gone crazy. What does he want to do? He's giving all this power to the people. Social media is obviously an asset, but it also is something that can constrict. This constant, minute by minute observation about what's going on in life is something to deal with. So with that, for those of you who are taking these classes right now, think about what would you do if you were Hala? What would you do in country X? And you just had a simple piece of paper in front of you, and someone asks you, how do you want to organize your own government? What values are important to you? How do you want to do this? So Hala's struggling within her context, but honestly, we are all struggling with this question. So, those of you, questions? We've got a mic. I don't know if you can hear us, but we have a mic. Come on, students. You look like you're going to have a question. Yes, you're a social media person.
I am a social media person.
See, I knew.
I have a question about how social media is used by the state to target activists, to find activists, and is that something that you all thought about when you were designing a movement utilizing social media? Is that something you were fearful of?
Yeah. Well, it comes to you as a second thought, of course. It's not your first thing on your on your head. But again, what happened is that since 2011, we've seen a rise in the counterterrorism laws in Arab countries, and some of them in my country, so many decrees by the king to basically punish people who were challenging the religious identity of the state or the fundamentals of the state, the national unity. You get all those kinds of broad terms which really in effect means someone who's challenging the norms, basically, to reallocate resources or to change the status quo. But again, I would say that for those countries, it's very useful to have social media because how can you influence the masses? The countries have been learning, as well as we as activists are learning how to use the social media. For us, I would speak about myself, my mantra is don't say something on social media that you don't want to be responsible for. So basically, I feel more confident in being open about my ideas, no matter how drastically different or unacceptable as they are, because I feel like that will shield me or protect me from being misinterpreted or being framed for those opinions. But again, for the state, they've been learning since 2011. They've learned the power of the internet on how to control them, because I mean now they very much overlooked the idea of, and you get to see that from different places. You get to see that in the fanfare of the visit of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, how much is highly promoted on the news, on the media. So in a way, and they are very much pushing more and more women to speak for the state instead of, so you get to see how the representation of civil society of what's missing has been somehow countered by the state. It gives the state not only a way to influence public opinion, to promote their own narratives on the state. Of course, it's much more refined and better narrative than the ones that's been used before. So, for instance, they're hijacking the statements of activists, actually, and trying to make it as generated by a new leader, right? So the new leader owns, he actually was called the emancipator of women in 60 Minutes CBS. So what about the other women who have been lobbying since 1990, right? What about the civil society? And why would an emancipator of women would put activist women in prison, right? So you get to see all those kinds of narrative, and at the same time, they're using it to target. And this is one of the things I've always noted, is that how the social media can give you the illusion of being free while you are very much targeted. It's just not only you, but all the people who are retweeting you. We have activists inside Saudi Arabia who are being punished for retweeting, not for saying something. So we are at a place where you're not only judged by your own views, but your preferences. So who are you supporting? Which networks are you part of? So you get to see around a wider scale of arrests. So before that, you get to see like 10 or 20 people getting arrested because of their views online. And in the court, they would be asked, how many followers do you have? By a religious judge. A religious judge is now judging the technology. So you get this is very funny when you think of it, right? And he would say, well, how many retweets you've got on that tweet, right? He would ask him that. So you get to see even the ways that they're phrasing the sentences in a way that it is divisive for national unity. Because if you're having so many people, you're somehow held, who follows you, somehow has held more accountable or responsible for things you say online. So you get more punishment than someone with 3,000 followers, for instance, right? So you get to see how it's, again, a hunting ground. It's not only, I'm not sure if you're hearing me properly. So it is a hunting ground as well as a platform for influencing public. It's a very strong, and again, because it's a very reductive medium, it can be easy to pass ideas without scrutiny. It is very quick, very reductive, and it's very difficult to challenge things on a deeper level. And this is one of the challenges as well, when you want to discuss things which have more, I would say, nuances, basically, like the position of different women in different, like the intersectionality, for instance. How can you push that kind of narrative when the government is, well, we've appointed women, we've allowed women to drive. What more could you ask for, right? So you get to see those kinds of challenges in trying to push an idea which is very much difficult to push in such a platform. So there is limitation as well. So unless you expect your followers to be that deep and to research things on their own, not to do your job for them, their job for them. So basically, you're not gonna be able to win in this kind. And this has been the scheme. There is all kinds of video games promoting Saudi Arabia, invading Iran. All kinds of quick fixes, quick things which are very difficult for activists. This is like a PR, huge PR machine has been taking hold of the social media in Saudi Arabia.
I've got a question. I've got a question. Can you hear me?
No, I think it's
right
the way.
There it is. I have a question for you and for all of you. How do you deal with hatred? When you post something, or you post something, and somebody writes you back a really negative, hostile thing. I did it once briefly. I got my feelings hurt so much.
Yeah.
I stayed off social media for weeks.
Yeah.
I said something to me innocent, and someone just crushed me.
Yeah.
Somebody crushed me by just saying something, I forgot what it was, something very basic. And again, we're all human beings. We're not heartless. How do you deal with this onslaught of hatred? So what do you do?
I don't have that many followers.
Yeah, of course, you get, this is one of the things that we talk about. Your emotional health and well-being is very much on my own. Can you hear me? So, yeah, your emotional well-being is always at risk once you pursue something where you are at a power struggle. Anytime you push yourself to be at a forefront of a power struggle, then you are confronting. It's like a very exhausting thing that you don't see the rewards. It's not like a job well done where you get to see the rewards and you feel good about yourself, because these are things on the other part of the people's minds and hearts. It's very much difficult. But you get to see that people are learning. For instance, I'm one of the most, I think, targeted people, not only by the state, but as well by people who are trying to prove themselves loyal to the state, because that's a time where they catch opportunities, right? So you get to see Islamists, for instance, so different groups somehow contesting for power inside Saudi Arabia. In 2012, I was invited to speak at a conference in Kuwait called An-Nahda Conference. So in that conference, I was, I think, the only woman, and the organizer of the conference was supposedly part of a Muslim Brotherhood, but more of a moderate line of thinking. And I remember when I told him I don't have any picture except my passport picture with the cover, the head cover. And he said, well, can we have your passport pictures? The people who are coming to this is morely, from Islamist. So I said, it's great. He's inviting me. He's inviting Shiite person. He's inviting, liberals. He's inviting Stephen Dakrawa, who's written Awakening Islam, to speak about their own civil society work. And my own work is why I feel like women empowerment should be really uplifted in the public policy and discourse. So I felt like this is, even though organized by Islamist group, but they're very much moderate Islamist group, very much inclusive Muslims, and we should support them. But then 2 weeks before the conference, all kinds of hell broke loose. 150 clerics wrote a petition online, and they lobbied the king to arrest me and other people who are, trying to trick youth into believing that there is, way other than their own way, the Muslim, the good way, basically. So we get to have, Muslim Brotherhood's parliament member in Kuwait coming on national TV and accusing me of offending Islam, and I'm not a good representative of Islam. So you see how the change, now we're against the Muslim Brotherhood, but at the time it was used as an argument to basically exclude me and other people who are not really conforming Muslims, right? But again, you get to see the complete opposite now. Of course, the conference was banned. And I gave my speech by another activist group, took up the work of providing a venue for the speakers, if they want to pursue it. And I spoke from Skype because basically I felt like I don't want to compromise my chances. I was doing my field work for my PhD at the time in Jeddah, and I didn't want to be banned from travel. So I thought, okay, I'm going to give my paper, but not in physical, space. I don't want to really test that water, but I give it through Skype and other people as well. But again, you have to be very picky in who to respond to. You have to be aware who are there to basically bully you or to prove that they're better than you because the government would give them something in rewards, right? So recently, a lawyer who has been championing the case of supporting rights, but again, has switched camps since Prince Mohammed bin Salman came to power. That lawyer decided that I'm an agent of the West. I'm trying, because I mentioned 60 Minutes, there was this video of a woman who was trying to seek help online. And this has been a venue as well for abused women to seek help because the channels, the formal channels in Saudi Arabia to support survivors of violence is very much limited. And they prioritize the counseling or maintenance of family ties over removing of women in dangerous situations. So this woman came online and put a video of herself seeking help. So I actually mentioned 60 Minutes. They have a handler on Twitter and said, well, look at the woman emancipator. Look at how many women. This woman has such and such, and I've translated everything she said. And so he got really offended. Why do I have to solve the issues of Saudi Arabia by reaching out to people outside Saudi Arabia? And of course, in that narrative, he called me names, and he was very aggressive and even took a video of himself explaining why he hates me so much. I didn't see the video, but I saw the reaction. It was hundreds of people retweeting him. And then I said, well, I'm going to just say, why would you resort to, calling names or, profanity for boasting your opinion? You can have an opinion. You can say, I don't like to reach out to people outside to solve problems which are domestic problems. But again, why would you see Mohammed bin Salman appearing in 60 Minutes and not for us as constituency? Why is it okay for him and not okay for us? Why the voices of Mohammed bin Salman should be highlighted, but not the voices of people who are activists? So I took it on a series of tweets, and amazingly enough, I didn't do a lot of support for myself. A lot of people have supported that. So you get to see how people are learning to defend each other's. So it's not, you don't get, of course, the same scale of support as someone as influential, as someone from the government. But you get to see that, and it makes you feel happy at times. And you get to identify who are the people that you're in a virtual, battle with, right? It's not only the state. There are people who are aspiring for positions of influence. There are people who have stronghold position of power, like the Islamist before, or the liberal now, right? The new liberal, I would say, not the liberals. Or the state women, right? You get to see by those kinds of engagement, which somehow seems aggressive. This is the heart of activism. This is how you filter through who everyone belongs to. What is your call? What do you actively, are here for, right? So you get to understand your context through those kinds of engagement, no matter how brutal it is. But of course, it can be brutal, but try to keep calm. It's another day. People will forget in a few minutes after a few tweets, after someone else posts this. So you can always rely on the short span of people's memory.
That it passes over. If somebody writes something negative, do you young kids, do you think, oh, that's no big deal, tomorrow's a new day, or does it stay with you? What do you think? Or do you all stay off social media? Yes, back there. But how do you keep civility? That's kind of what I'm basically saying. The whole purpose of this group is civility. But when you get online, I have found there's something about online that I would, let's say if you were opposite of me, you and I would probably have a hard time saying harsh things to each other because we're looking at each other face to face. But when you're online, you're kind of anonymous. So how do you deal with that part? How do you keep civil? Yeah.
Whenever I get like a negative comment, I have to look at it objectively and I have to decide, is it worth responding to? Is it a criticism? Is it constructive criticism? Or is it just someone that wants to feel better about themselves by putting other people down? So that's how
Do you engage?
for the most part, I only engage if it comes from someone who's actually making like a good criticism, like, you've done this wrong, here's how you can improve. But it's someone that's just like, you suck. I'm like, you're not worth my time. Like,
And do you engage?
you know, it's not worth my time to let this person think that they've bothered me. I just I read it and I go, okay, and then I move on because it's not, you know,
Okay,
acknowledging them makes them feel better.
How many of you guys would engage, and how many of you would say, so who's an engager? A few? And how many I'm just not going to email that person? Okay, engager. Tell me, how do you do it?
So could you repeat the question?
You say, I said, if you all, no matter what our age, if you get a hostile email, you wrote something you thought was, okay, innocuous, and somebody writes you back and say, how could you say that? You must be evil, bad, un-Islamic, un-American. I don't care what the charge is. When you say you engage, you try to write back and say, what I meant to say was?
No. Usually when I say something, I usually mean it. So if I'm ever engaged in any way that's in a form of a negative way, then I come back at a very clear, concise, educational way, but I'm also address them like, no, this is what I mean, and I'm very unapologetic. So I turn them down.
But do you call? So part of, to me, the question is, do you end up doing name calling also?
No.
How do you?
No, you break down what they say and tell them why their education is what their comment isn't true. So you tell them why they're not wrong, in a civil way, I guess.
Okay. Okay, yeah, down there.
What I've ended up doing in the past is if I spread or post an opinion that I have and somebody comments like disagreeing with me, if their comment is like respectful, like you said, like constructive, then I'll usually leave it and like respond to them and just have like an educational conversation just to like hear other people's ideas. But if they're like disagreeing with me in the way that they present their disagreement to be like really disrespectful and rude, then I'll typically end up deleting the comment, and then I'll like message them directly saying, hey, if you want to have a conversation about this, like I'd be willing to, but not if you're going to be rude about it.
Yeah.
I think that we can all agree that women are living in an insecure world, and the women in my community, right now are living in fear. ICE, racism, division. Somebody might come and say, Lily, I want your opinion. Terrified. How do you work with people that have something to say, that are intelligent, that contribute, but that fear keeps them away? What are some of the tools you can use to help people to get engaged?
As women and as activists, we get that a lot. Again, because people are resorting to social media to voice those kinds of fears and concern on the risk of having retaliation by the abusers, like the women I've mentioned who posted a video calling for help. What we can do is to basically give legitimacy to her needs and call by basically retweeting what she's saying, explaining, reaching out to people who might be of influence. and using those kinds of stories as basically the litmus test of the system, putting it back into why do we have those structural barriers that put women at risk, to basically validate those kinds of advocacy that we're trying to push for. But again, it's a very risky thing. So I've been engaged with 2 women from Turkey who eloped their father, basically, and they were trying to get a residency in Turkey. But of course, the Saudi government reported them as missing, and they ended up now in detention, waiting deportation. So my work with them, and this is one of the tricky things, it's very difficult to decipher the truth about things that you reach online. What kind of, you only rely on the stories of the women. Most of the places, because I have a website that is dedicated to support women who are survivors of violence or live with violence. Those kinds of stories do not come, you know, comprehensive or clear. You get to rely on the women's narrative, and it's very much traumatized and, you know, very much missing important details. And you might end up with a woman, and we actually end up with a woman, Saudi woman with 3 children, until she got asylum in Sweden. But then she decided to go back to Saudi, which is very weird, right? I mean, when you deal with these kinds of stories or these kinds of issues, realize that you don't have all the facts in order, that you can do your own part of support by trying to think beyond the story, what kind of issue that resulted that situation, and how can I make this kind of issue go away? How can I make it like a big part of the public policy and the discussion or the discourse? How can I influence people to be more sensitized towards the pain and the fear of these women? And you get other women as well who might not be, as you said, because they are very much marginalized and they want to be part of this activism or of the public space. They're writers, and I'm not the best, you know, authority on there, because I'm one of the people who always feel that online you might not really present the best communication, you know, means to people. So you might fall, you know. I get a woman, for instance, who sent me her articles. And some of the times I'm very much pained by, you know, a work that is less than perfect, right? If I find that someone did not present a very balanced views, I feel like I always feel that the words has power and you have to do your job really well. So I'm somehow come sharp at people and tell them, well, you didn't do that, you didn't do this, you didn't ask the people you're writing about. And sometimes people don't take that really well. They feel like you're not supportive as someone who is a leader or as a pioneer, and you're not, you know, embracing what we're doing or putting us forward. So it's very much tricky, right? But again, you always know, because you've passed through all those kinds of hurdles, you have this, you know, experience that you can share. You've recognized, you know, patterns, and you can, you know, share. And this is part of why I'm out online as well, is to share those kinds of experience and understanding to other people who might be going through the same thing. But given, as I said, it's not the real medium to deliver ideas or to lend support. There is no, it's a way to communicate, but it is not the way to empower people. It's just a tool. And to empower people, it means you have to work on a bigger context, and you have to work with women themselves. But of course, as I said, it's important to recognize that some people might be more or less privileged or more at risk of you know, presenting their own voices. And of course, those kinds of why we have more women presence there, it's very much self-explanatory.
Hi, Hala. I'm sorry. I came a few minutes late, so I don't know if you addressed this. You were referring to the patriarchal society, of course, having controls, but even within each home, within each family, does a father, brother, son give permission to the women in the house to even be on social media for just 2 girlfriends who are teenage girls being able to communicate with each other? Shed some light culturally how young a family might allow young women to get on social media. Maybe that varies between a more liberal or conservative family. And do you start seeing a trend now that if younger kids, teenagers, or even people in their 20s, men and women who want to socialize with each other on social media, is getting them more comfortable with it? So within a 5-year window, you're 15 years old now, by the time you're 20, you're going to recognize you've mastered social media as a tool to communicate opinions that will start coming into your mind.
So yeah, definitely women and men in Saudi Arabia, especially those who are active, there's different kind of uses like any kind of society, but in Saudi Arabia it's more for younger generation to validate basically their identity, to be out there. Mostly are posting their names as basically nicknames, not the real names. So you wouldn't find many people who are posting their own full name, unless of course they're recognized writers or community figures or even people, but very, very little amount of people who would post their own identity online. So for instance, the artist, I said, it's a very, so yeah, you need to have a phone first, and with that assumption, exactly, you need to have a phone or a smartphone device or through your computer. It's very accessible to young people inside Saudi Arabia. They're very, almost everyone has an access to a computer or a phone. But the applications differ, so they don't necessarily use social media. They might use Snapchat, things like that, but not things which allow them more privacy to pursue things of their own interest. YouTube, for instance, has the highest viewership inside Saudi Arabia, which is a medium for uploading videos or watching things online. So there is a lot of curiosity on knowing what's happening around the world. I wouldn't say that we get a lot of people who are meeting online, but again, with the same risks involved. So online relationships rarely develop beyond that because we remain very much a traditional society where marriages, or very much 50% of marriages are arranged within the family, right? Within family relatives, or it's very much tribal society. But you get to see a shift and change. You know, people, you get to see more and more people taking up to YouTube as stand-up comedians, right? And this is something new. People to be out there and to talk with more men. We have only one woman stand-up comedian in Saudi Arabia, and we have, loads of men. So you get to see that, yes, different families have different ethos, but of course the families who are progressive, who are allowing women to be out there and visible and speaking out, they're very much a minority, remains a minority. Because it's very difficult to challenge this kind of, and I talked about it, that medium, the social media does not allow you to be in an in-depth discussion. It just allows you to give a very reductionist opinions about things. It is not the medium to challenge norms on a deeper level, or to present arguments, that is really nuanced and inclusive for everyone. It's a very much instantaneous, I would say more to the spread of idea more than to analyze an idea or to reflect on idea, right? But yes, of course, you see a change. We're very, like, for instance, as you said, young people, like you get to see people who are fairly young, like 5 years, 6 years, very efficient in using different applications on their iPad. Or it's very interesting to see how technology became part and parcel of childhood now, even in places like Saudi Arabia, which are politically very much controlled.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. Observation? Yes.
Are you finding that your movement is spreading in the region at all?
Yes, you get to see, because the social media is more of a global movement, right? This circle. The social media is not like a boundary specific, thing, but and there is a lot of similarities and cultural norms across different Arab countries, and even across the world. You get a lot of support from the outside world. I mean, I've been recognized with a Human Rights Watch award this year, right, and for extraordinary activism, and it's something that would never happen unless, of course, people all over the world are watching and seeing what's happening, on a global level. I mean, your work has been more of you can be easily reached, you can be easily commenting on things, and again, as I said, this kind of presence puts you in a different context. So I look at the similarity and parallels across different countries now, because of my position, not only on social media, because I've been recognized for something I'm doing, and then was included in an advisory board for two human rights organizations in the region. And then you see the parallels of things across the region. I mean, even in places, I think there is an interesting scholar here who said that democracy has never allowed for full gender equality in any country in the world, which is true. I think it's not only to have the tools, but it's also to have the resilience and the persistence, the sustainability, and the ability to keep on basically finding out what's missing, making people invest more in finding ways to improve the system to work for everyone instead of few. So for instance, a woman posted a video of herself walking on the street to object to the driving ban. And she said, I'm going to go and walk every day to my school or to my work. And you get to see women in Kuwait and Bahrain are taking video of themselves walking in support. And you get to see these kinds of acts of solidarity. For the woman, the artist I talked about from Australia, the Saudi artist who's doing her work in Australia. She has other artists from different parts of the world doing her graffiti in New York. So you get to see how people are acting in solidarity because they felt that they can relate to certain things. And it's just not only in Saudi Arabia, it's all over the world. You get to see this kind of acts of solidarity reproduced and promoted, and people relate to it because really it's, I think it's facets of different severity of the same issue.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. I want to leave you with one other observation. I had tea last week. I was in D.C. with a woman my age, so has daughters, Hala's age. And this woman was saying, and she's been active in having voting opportunities, encouraging women in Saudi to run for office. So she's progressive on human rights and women's rights issues. But her first comment to me was, Janet, every day there's a concert in Riyadh. And when I was there, we were there from 2009 to 2013. During that period of time, the idea of a public musical concert was basically forbidden. It was haram. It was un-Islamic to do. And so what she was trying to express to me, and you all, especially as students, you happen to be alive right now at a moment of profound change, profound evolution within a country that is, Saudi Arabia is very conservative, culturally in many, many ways. And yet, this access to the world is something we're all dealing with, right? I'm dealing with it. My grandchildren are dealing with it because they're 5 and they are already on this, or they know how to use this. My goodness. So I want to leave you with that. I think the need for this idea, this global citizen circle, is more important now than ever before to keep civility in the conversation. We can't control this. All we can control is how we deal with each other in the conversation. So thanks so much for coming. Hala's going to be here for a while to ask her questions.
I just want to thank everybody on behalf of Global Citizen Circle. I want to thank our volunteers. My intern this semester, Megan Blaisdell, has been wonderful running around with this mic. And I want to very much thank both you, Hala, and Janet for a very interesting and important conversation. I feel like we just started, and I wish we had more time. The formal part of the program has ended, but please feel free to come up, and if you have questions and you'd like to, the informal part of the program can continue. Thank you for coming. Oh, and there is a lot of food here, so please, please help yourselves before you leave. Thank you.